Gas prices are now above $4.52 a gallon, and the man in charge of America's energy just admitted the administration is out of predictions. 8 weeks ago, he promised gas below $3 by summer. Today, that promise is gone. And now they're considering something they've resisted for years. Here's what's actually happening and why it matters more than the number on the pump. This is Sunday, May 10th, 2026. On NBC's Meet the Press, Energy Secretary Chris Wright sat down with moderator Kristen Welker. The conversation started where most American conversations start right now, at the gas station. Gas prices hit a national average of $4.52 per gallon on Sunday, according to AAA data, an increase of more than 50% since the start of the Iran war. 50% in the span of this conflict. Welker asked Wright directly, would the Trump administration support suspending the federal gas tax to give Americans some relief? Wright didn't say no. He said the administration supports all measures that can be taken to lower the price at the pump, and when pressed specifically on the gas tax, his answer was 3 words. We're open to all ideas. 3 words that signal something significant, because this administration has spent months insisting the energy picture was improving. If you want fact-based coverage that cuts through the noise on this story, subscribe now, because this situation is moving fast and the next update could change the calculus entirely. Let's build this carefully, because there are 2 stories happening at once here, and understanding both of them is how you actually understand what's at stake. Story 1, the price of gas. The federal gas tax currently stands at about 18 cents per gallon. That's a federal levy baked into every fill-up, every time, at every station across the country. It funds highway infrastructure, bridges, roads. It's been a political hot potato for decades, touched by neither party for fear of what it costs the federal budget or what it signals politically. But Democrats in Congress introduced a bill back in March to temporarily suspend that federal gas tax until October. At the time, the Republican administration largely brushed it aside. Now, 8 weeks later, the Energy Secretary is on national television saying the administration is open to it. That's a shift. Maybe a small one technically, but politically, it's notable. And here's where the second story begins. Wright previously told Meet the Press in March that there was a very good chance gas prices could drop below $3 per gallon by the summer. At the time, he predicted that Americans will feel it for a few more weeks. Read that again. A very good chance. Below $3. A few more weeks. 8 weeks later, gas prices have continued to climb and show no immediate sign of returning to pre-war prices. That March prediction has now become a very visible problem because voters remember what their energy secretary told them. And the gap between that forecast and the $4.52 they're paying today is not a small rounding error. It's a $1.50 per gallon rounding error. When Welker pressed Wright on Sunday about whether prices could hit $5 per gallon, he chose his words carefully. He said he was just avoiding price predictions, while also pointing to the strength of U.S. oil and natural gas production as a source of confidence. Avoiding price predictions. That's different language from a very good chance. Meanwhile, the war shaping all of this continues. Iran's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is still in effect, and the United States launched an operation called Project Freedom last week, aimed at guiding ships through the strait. But Trump ultimately paused it. A military operation to force open one of the world's most critical energy choke points, launched, then paused. And while that pause holds, the price at your pump keeps climbing. An 18-cent tax cut. That's the proposal on the table. Gas is up more than $1.50 since the war started. Do the math and ask yourself what the administration is actually offering here. To understand why this story is about more than just gas prices, you need to understand the Strait of Hormuz. It is roughly 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. It sits between Iran to the north and Oman to the south. And through that narrow passage flows roughly 1/5 of the world's traded oil. Tankers carrying crude from Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iraq, Kuwait, they all pass through there. Close the strait and you don't just raise American gas prices, you send shockwaves through every economy on Earth that depends on oil, which is most of them. Iran knows this. It has known it for decades. And right now, according to NBC News reporting, Iran's continued blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is the central reason gas prices haven't recovered, even as the U.S. maintains its own blockade of Iranian ports. Experts say that while the U.S. blockade would ultimately deprive Iran of necessary oil revenue, the country could likely withstand that economic pressure for months. Months, not days, not weeks. So here's the fundamental problem the administration is facing. The tool they're using, economic pressure on Iran, is real, but slow. And the damage to American consumers is real, but immediate. Every single day that the strait stays blocked, the political pressure on the White House increases. That's why Wright's language on the gas tax is significant. He said, "Everything has trade-offs," when discussing the idea of suspending the federal tax. That phrase, "everything has trade-offs," is an acknowledgement that there's no clean solution here. Suspending the federal gas tax costs the government revenue it uses to maintain American infrastructure. It doesn't fix the supply problem. It offers about 18 cents of relief against a $1.50 per gallon price surge. But it gives the administration something to point to. And in a midterm election year, something to point to matters. Let me know in the comments. Do you think suspending the gas tax actually moves the needle for everyday Americans? Or is it barely a band-aid on a much bigger wound? And here's what makes this even more complicated geopolitically. The U.S. launched Project Freedom, a military operation specifically designed to escort ships safely through the Hormuz choke point and break Iran's stranglehold. Then, Trump paused it, leaving open the question of what comes next. A military operation to forcibly open an international shipping lane. Launched, then stopped. Why? What changed? The administration hasn't fully explained. And that absence of explanation is its own kind of signal. Here's what most coverage of this story is missing. In March, Chris Wright didn't just say prices might improve. He said there was a very good chance gas would fall below $3 by summer, and that Americans would feel relief within a few more weeks. That wasn't a hedge. That was a commitment dressed up as a prediction. And now the same official is on the same show 8 weeks later, saying he's just avoiding price predictions. When a cabinet secretary stops making predictions, it's not necessarily humility. Sometimes it means the situation stopped matching the predictions. The question nobody's fully answered. Did the administration miscalculate how long Iran could hold the strait? Or did they know and say what they said anyway? Let's step away from the geopolitics for a moment and stand at a gas pump in a regular American city. $4.42. For a 15-gallon tank, that's nearly $68 per fill-up. For a family running 2 cars, filling up twice a week, you're looking at an extra $200 or more per month compared to what they were paying before the war started. That's a car payment. That's groceries for a week. That's a utility bill. And this isn't spread evenly across the country. Gas prices vary by state, by region, by proximity to refineries and pipelines. In states that are already expensive, California, Nevada, parts of the Pacific Northwest, prices were already significantly higher than the national average before all this. Add 50% to that baseline, and the math becomes genuinely difficult for households already running lean. Think about who feels this most directly. Small business owners running delivery vehicles, contractors who drive job to job, families in rural areas where driving isn't optional. It's the only way to get anywhere. Commuters without access to public transit. Gig economy drivers whose entire income model depends on the gap between what they earn per mile and what they spend on fuel. For those people, the proposal to suspend an 18-cent federal tax is real money. Not life-changing, but real. 18 cents per gallon on a 15-gallon fill-up is $270, not nothing, especially if you fill up every few days. But here's the emotional truth underneath the numbers. People are not just frustrated by the price. They're frustrated by the gap between what they were told and what they're experiencing. In March, the Energy Secretary said gas would likely fall below $3 by summer. People heard that. Some of them planned around it, deferred purchases, delayed trips, made assumptions about their summer budget based on official government statements about where prices were headed. Now it's May. Summer is close, and prices have gone the other direction. That kind of whiplash between official optimism and lived reality erodes trust in ways that go beyond the price of fuel. It changes how people feel about whether they're being told the truth. It changes what they believe when the next statement comes, and there will be a next statement. Because Wright said on CBS's Face the Nation that if it becomes clear in the coming days there's no path to a negotiated settlement with Iran, the U.S. will go back to the military method to open the strait. The military method. That phrase is worth sitting with, Because it means what it sounds like, using military force to physically compel passage through a waterway that Iran considers its strategic leverage point. That's not a diplomatic communique. That's an escalation signal wrapped in bureaucratic language. Meanwhile, people are filling up their tanks and doing the math in real time. And that math keeps coming out wrong for them. Project Freedom is paused, but Wright says it could restart within days. If it does, what does Iran do? Does it back down, or does it respond in a way that further disrupts shipping through the strait? And if the U.S. moves militarily to force the strait open, does that accelerate a negotiated end to this war? Or does it harden Iran's position and extend the conflict? Either path carries a price, not just in geopolitical terms, literally, at the pump, in your wallet, for as long as this takes. The administration's negotiation window is described as just a few days. That clock is running right now. Step back from the immediate news cycle and look at the shape of this moment. The United States is fighting a war that is directly affecting the cost of energy for every American household. The primary choke point of that war, the Strait of Hormuz, remains under Iranian influence despite U.S. military and economic pressure. A major military operation to break that choke point was launched, then paused for diplomatic reasons. And now the White House is floating a domestic tax relief measure that wasn't seriously on their table 2 months ago. That trajectory tells a story. The story is not one of a crisis under control. It's one of a crisis that is proving more durable than anticipated, and a government reaching for tools it hadn't originally planned to use. Wright said on Sunday that the U.S. is ending a 47-year conflict Iran has fought, citing Iran's long-standing death to America, death to Israel posture. That framing positions this war not as a crisis to be minimized, but as a necessary confrontation that the U.S. chose to bring to resolution, which means the administration is not looking for a way out. It's looking for a way through. That's a meaningful distinction. A president seeking an exit would be signaling maximum urgency to get to a deal. An administration that frames this as a 47-year conflict being finally resolved is implicitly prepared to absorb some duration. The question is whether the American consumer is equally prepared. Experts have assessed that Iran could withstand U.S. economic pressure for months. Not days, not weeks. Months. If that assessment is accurate, then the Strait of Hormuz may remain contested well into the summer, possibly beyond. And every week it stays contested, the pressure on the domestic political situation inside the United States intensifies. Midterm elections tend to be referendums on the incumbent party's management of the country. Gas prices are one of the most viscerally felt economic indicators there is. More immediate than inflation statistics, more personal than GDP numbers. People don't need a report to tell them how much they paid to fill up their tank. The administration is watching that political clock even as it watches the military one. And the gas tax proposal, whether it moves forward or not, is evidence that they're aware of both. There's also something worth watching on the Iranian side of this. Iran has endured enormous economic pressure for decades under various sanctions regimes. Its economy is built, in some ways, around surviving that pressure. But the Hormuz blockade is also costing Iran, diplomatically, economically, in terms of its relationships with regional neighbors who need that shipping lane too. How long Tehran can sustain that blockade without fracturing its own regional partnerships is a question that U.S. strategists are certainly trying to answer. If the negotiation window closes without a deal and Project Freedom restarts, the next chapter of this story gets written very quickly. And the outcome determines whether the summer looks like gradual relief or further escalation. Nobody in Washington and nobody in Tehran can tell you with certainty which one it will be. That is where this stands right now. A military pause, a diplomatic window measured in days, a gas tax proposal that wasn't on the table 2 months ago, and a prediction made in March that reality has quietly dismantled. This story isn't close to finished. The next move, whether it's a deal, a restart of military operations, or something nobody's fully anticipated yet, will change the shape of everything that follows. What do you think happens next? Does the U.S. get a negotiated settlement? Or does Project Freedom restart by the end of the week? Drop your read on this in the comments. I genuinely want to see what you're thinking. Subscribe so you don't miss the next update. When this story moves, it moves fast, and the next development could come any hour.